On this episode of Locked On Angels, player union rep Tony Clark had some things to say about our Halos and how the Halos spend money. So we're going to share what he said, and then we're going to respond in our final segment. It's time to get locked on with Mike and John, and this is Locked On Angels.
You are Locked On Angels, your daily Los Angeles Angels podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen of the day. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and SiriusXM by searching Locked On Angels. And if you'd like to get back to the Super Halo Bros for all this Super Halo content, here's some things that you can do. Leave us a rate and a review on Apple Podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button. And if you're not subscribed already, please subscribe and become a Locked On everydayer. And whether you're watching or listening, come over to YouTube and leave a comment. It's one of the best ways to get in touch with us and be a part of the conversation.
Happy Tuesday to you, and thanks for being here for this episode of Locked On Angels, where it's your team every day. You've got the Frisch Brothers here with you, a.k.a. the Super Halo Bros. My name is John, and that's my brother Mike.
And my name is Mike, and that's my brother John.
Hey, it's our fourth season as the host of Locked On Angels. We're lifelong fans of this team, talking Angels baseball Monday through Friday, every single weekday. In fact, on today's show, we're getting into the comments that MLBPA rep, the head of the MLBPA, I should say, Tony Clark, had some things about the way the Halos spend their money. Probably stuff you've heard before. At the same time, it's still a very interesting conversation. We're going to have our responses to that in the third segment. But first, Mike, let's talk about yesterday's game as the Angels fell to the Colorado Rockies in Tempe.
Yeah, before the game, we got word on two players. Taylor Ward was out because he's dealing with some knee soreness, so he's just day-to-day. And then Luis Rengifo was scratched from the lineup because of a hamstring tightness. Johnny really hasn't been there right now.
He had and a lot of people are asking, what happened to Rengifo? Well, he did play on Friday, and he had the same flu bug that was going around the clubhouse. So that's why he's been not in the lineup very often. He played Friday, and that's the last time we got to see him. That was also his first day of spring training. So yeah, dealing with that flu bug, and then now he's got that hammy tightness. Can't have a tight hammy, Mike. Why not when you're being counted on for the season? Come on now.
Right. Now I know that obviously he'd been sick and that was his first game. It just concerned me at first when everydayers were asking about him. I'm like, we haven't mentioned him. And then I realized they're slowly easing him in to spring training time. And as you mentioned, I think it was yesterday's show, it feels like they've been playing spring training games for the last month when really it's only been about a week, right? They're 9-10 games in. And so all of that, John, do you get concerned about that with Rengifo, or is it one of those things like that just happens coming from the off season, getting ready for spring, getting ready for the season?
Yeah, this isn't anything new that we haven't seen before. Just some guys they don't get into every game anyway. And so the fact that he was scheduled for this and then, was scratched, okay, then he'll be in there tomorrow or Wednesday or Thursday. Right. So I'm not too concerned at this point of spring training. Like I said, it's felt like a million years long already. We're seeing a ton of backups getting some looks in terms of pitching and hitting, and they're still trying to figure out that middle infield situation of who's going to break through and be the guy to kind of fill in while Neto is out, not just at shortstop, but around the infield. And Rengifo is certainly a lock for, a roster spot, of course, so that's not a concern. You just want him to be in baseball shape by the time that opening day rolls around, because he was injured halfway through the season last year.
Yeah, it brings up a good point, and it answers probably a question that we'll get to in just a second. But John, the game wasn't great. Angels didn't do much offensively. Now, Mike Trout did have 2 hits in this game, so he continues to see the ball really well, walking a lot. Travis d'Arnaud hit a home run in this game, which was exciting to see. And then Yoan Moncada had another walk in this game. No hits yet, but has, I think, 6 walks so far in the spring. And then Soler struck out twice in this game, and that's going to be a part of what we will see from him moving forward and in the regular season. He'll have a couple of really great games, and then he'll have some games where he just is swinging over things or he's watching pitches go down the strike zone. And so that's a part of his game. We just know that that's going to happen. It might be frustrating, especially if it happens during key moments. But back to your point about they're still mixing and matching and trying to figure some things out. The offense has really been lacking so far in the first week. There hasn't been a lot of excitement outside of a few moments. Adele's grand slam and Jorge Soler's hit a couple of home runs and Mike Trout's getting on base. That's what you want, right? Like, we shouldn't be too concerned if the Angels aren't scoring a bunch of runs in the first week of spring, right?
What is it that Mike Trout said? He wants 100 plate appearances. This was last year he said that before he really gets going. And part of those 100 plate appearances are the plate appearances you're going to get in spring training. So by the time you hit March and April, within that first week, you're at, 100 plate appearances by the end of the week so that you can really start to ramp up. So I get it. And look, these games where they lose, 8-4 to the Rockies, you put that on some of the arms that are coming into this game, right?
Yeah.
So the offense looks ridiculous and outrageous for the other team, and the pitching looks really bad and whatnot. So I just, it's the same thing I've been saying about starters. Give them 3 starts or appearances before you really start judging them. And I think when it comes to, the offense, give it another week and a half, and we'll start to see just exactly what we're getting here. The thing that I appreciate, and going back to yesterday, was somebody like Tim Anderson fouling off. What do you have, a 10+ pitch at bat?
Yeah.
Battling up there, really trying to just make something of his plate appearance. That's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for. That's the kind of stuff I want to see. Trout taking walks or Moncada taking walks. That's a part of their game. And so, and I mentioned this about Joe Adell too. When he's not swinging out of the zone at strikeouts, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
How many times have we seen him do that? I know he hasn't had the hits. I know he hasn't had, a lot of success so far this season when you look at the line score. But again, I'm just trying to look for the nitty gritty and the nuance of how are these guys handling their approaches at the plate. Think about somebody like Nolan Shonowell, who I saw some frustration just because he's doing the same thing he was kind of doing last year, just grounding out to the right side of the field. And people were saying he added 15 pounds, but was it muscle, or was it like beer belly, or,
Right. Yeah.
But the thing is when he hit that double last week, what did I say? It was the short, compact swing out in front that had him pull the ball and hit it off the wall. And so I look at that kind of stuff, and I wish I could get in somebody's ear and be like, there it is. That's what he needs to do. And again, you go back to his last season when he had the short, compact swing. He's hitting the ball really well over the month of July, and his swing length was short and compact. So I just wish that I could hammer home to somebody, like, get him to do that.
Right.
Or he's got to speed things up. He's got to keep it short and compact. So all that to say, I'm not concerned. I understand that, at the end of the day, there's wins and losses, but if the Angels were tearing it up in spring, what would the conversation be, Michael? It would be, well, here's the Kings of spring training, the champions again. And so you're danged if you do, danged if you don't. Catch 22, right? You can't win or you can't lose, no matter how it goes in spring training.
And that's what you look for in spring. You look for those little moments where they did something well and you want to build upon that. It's an opportunity for them to go, oh, that actually worked, and the coaches to point that out. And so you want to see that from some of the young players. And with this team, that's what you need to do as fans of this team, is look for those little moments where Nolan Shonowell does really well, or when Moncada does take a walk, or Mike Trout actually looks pretty comfortable right now after missing almost the entire season last year. And so all of those things are bonuses, are pluses, which is why you can't get over your head about some of the things that are frustrating, right? Like Tyler Anderson's start yesterday wasn't great. And one thing that you mentioned was that this is like the epitome of getting dinky dude, right? Like he was just getting like little tiny hits here or there. The ball found a spot and rolled. And unfortunately, that's been a part of his history as a pitcher. And so he's got to figure that out. He's got to put his defense in a good position to get to some of those balls. But 2 1/3 innings pitched, 6 hits, 4 earned runs. He did strike out 3. But John, it wasn't a great outing, but it did look like he was throwing some of the same pitch over and over and over again. Try to hit location, try to get a good feel for it. So it's one of the reasons why there were 6 hits in 2 1/3 innings pitched.
Yeah, he was throwing his fastball in there over and over and over again. You saw that play out where he was getting foul after foul after foul. And then I'm sitting at home watching, and I go, dude, throw a changeup. What are you doing? And then he did and got the strikeout. So it's obvious to me that he's working on command, which has to be a part of his game, Mike. He's got to be really fine if he's going to be a successful pitcher, he's got to be able to put the ball where he wants it to go. And on that note about dinky do, that somebody was like, what's a dinky do game? Well, it's when things bloop and fall in, and they fall between the infielder and the out. Yeah, it's like a lucky hit, basically. And there's all kinds of lucky hits all around the field. And so that's kind of what was happening to Tyler Anderson in those situations. But again, if you want to avoid that, you've got to have that pinpoint control. You got to be able to strike guys out. I think yesterday was a balance of, hey, I'm just going to work on location. And what was this, the second start? Yeah, second start.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to me that he is working on location and trying to get some things under control there. Now, speaking of control, Hans Kraus struggled with his control. Your Brendan Donnelly comparison, Mike. He walked 3 2/3 of an inning. Now, you and I have felt like he's going to be part of this pen, but if he's not a guarantee, who do you think is going to be the guy to replace him?
Immediately, Ryan Johnson comes to mind because I know that he's just somebody that has been on the forefront of my mind, caught my attention when he went in the day before, went in that game. And so I think that he might be somebody that they look at. I don't know if that's going to be the case. I think that they have a lot of flexibility. I'm trying to think of who's on the 40-man right now that they could move in and out. It'll be somebody that is on the 40-man. Unfortunately, there hasn't been somebody that has stood out that is on the 40-man. I know that Michael Darrell Hicks is a potential name, but even he has struggled in spring training. But again, these guys are working on stuff, and so I don't want to get too judgmental of all of that, because a great example was when Carlos Estevez was really struggling in spring and then became the closer, and they're like, why? Well, it was because he was working on the fastball location at the top of the zone. So who knows what these guys are working on specifically. I don't think that it's overly concerning about Kraus. However, 3 walks versus 3 hits is pretty telling, because hits mean, okay, he's throwing a fastball, trying to get a feel for it. But walks, like, he just didn't have his mechanics. He just was out of sorts when he was on the mound.
And that's also something to consider is, I think it was 61 degrees at game time, like when it started. And you went from 80 hot degrees weather, down to 61. And so, yeah, your mechanics are going to be a little bit off, because the last time we saw Hans Kraus, it was 3 Ks in a row against higher level of competition than, the Rockies backups to the backups. Right now, this was interesting. George Clausen got into another game. This was yesterday. He went 2 innings, 1 hit. He did surrender a home run, and he struck out 3.
Yeah.
Now, no walks is an improvement, because control has been an issue for him. If he cleans that up, I think he'll be up sooner than later for the Halos. Remember, they project him as a starter, and he's got mad velo. And when you throw mad velo and it gets hit right down the middle, then that's going to lead to the home run that he gave up to Jordan Beck.
Right.
And so that's an interesting, something to consider as well. But it was really great to see him in there. And again, going 2 innings and not giving up any walks, not issuing any free passes, that's a big part of his game that he's needed to clean up. And really, the biggest criticism, if you have a criticism for George Clausen, is the command and control. Hey, thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen of the day. Coming up, the head of the Players Union, Tony Clark, had some concern about how the Halos spend their money. We'll share what he had to say, and we'll respond to what he had to say in our final segment today, and we'll get into all of that coming right up.
This is the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. And thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen of the day. John, Tony Clark was a fun player to play with on like the show or some of those old baseball games. Big lefty, lots of home runs, played for the Tigers, and I appreciated him. His comments about the Halos are not going to be surprising.
Right.
Because these are things that Halo fans are aware of. So what John and I want to do is walk through the interview that he gave. Sam Blum was a part of that. And then we want to respond in the final segment. So let's get started, John, with first Tony Clark. He's the executive director of the Players Association, spoke to The Athletic. He said, surprise, surprise, that he believes the Angels are not willing to exceed the luxury tax threshold, unlike their big city counterparts. He said he has a problem with that because the Angels are located in the nation's second largest media market.
Now, when we talk about markets, I think that sometimes people get confused on what exactly that means. we're talking TV markets, right?
Mhm.
And so New York is obviously number one in terms of TV market. The reason the Angels are part of the Los Angeles market is not because they have Los Angeles Angels in their name. It's because they are part of the Los Angeles television market. You
Yeah.
understand that, like, from LA County to Orange County to the Inland Empire, you get KTLA 5, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
they broadcast out of LA and they are part of the Los Angeles market, but that market extends across a lot of Southern California. The third biggest market, Mike, is Chicago. And so
Mhm.
the Cubs and the White Sox are technically both big market teams. That's why the Angels fall into this category. Just wanted to explain that up top before we continue the conversation.
Yeah, it's a good word. Tony Clark said that the Angels have decided as an organization to treat the luxury tax threshold as a cap, and they're making decisions against that backdrop. He said it's unfortunate, particularly when they have the opportunity to do some big things in the market that they're in. He continued and said the way that they've treated it and the way that it is are two different things. In Clark's view, he said the Halos should be one of the biggest spenders in baseball alongside the 9 other teams that exceeded the tax last season. And unlike much lower spending franchises, the Angels' spending habits highlight how the team can use the CBT as a line that they simply won't cross. Exceeding the penalty for a season does require a team to pay a tax, 20% tax on every dollar above the threshold. So that was Tony's thoughts. The Angels did have a response, John, and Artie didn't say anything, but somebody else did. Why don't you share that?
Yeah, so they had Marie Garvey, who's the team spokesperson. She pushed back against Tony Clark's comments in a written statement. She said, "That's his opinion, and we don't agree with it."
I hear Cosmo Kramer. Well, that's your opinion. Like, that's all I hear, right? Like, there's nothing else. That's all that they said. That's his opinion, and we don't agree with it, right?
That's your state. You had to write that,
Right.
you know. You couldn't just like Siri text that to somebody, right?
Right.
The Angels have only finished the season over the luxury tax once
Right.
since Artie Moreno has been an owner. That was 2004. Now, remember in 2023, they did go over the luxury tax for a bit after they traded to get guys like Lucas Giolito and Ronaldo Lopez. It did put them over the luxury tax, but then they went and placed those 6 players on waivers to get back below the threshold because it's not where you went during the season, it's how you end the season. So that's how they ended up getting back under the luxury tax and not having to pay a penalty.
Now, the estimated payroll for our Halos is $202 million, up about $25 million from last year, but still well below the 241 threshold, $241 million. During the collective bargaining negotiations in 2022, and John and I talked about this on this show, Artie was one of just 4 owners who opposed any type of increase to that luxury tax,
Right.
like was against it. Now, the league moved forward with proposing an increase, regardless of how Artie felt and the other couple owners. And it eventually moved from 210 to 230 in the new CBA. And so even if they have avoided the tax, the Angels have been one of the top more spending franchises every single year. They've been at least in the top 10 the last few years when it comes to their on-field spending.
Yeah, Tony Clark said that they've treated the luxury tax threshold in a way that the way that they have, and it's hard to believe it hasn't had some effect on the level of success that they've had. And, Sam's article mentions Trout last year really trying to push Artie to add some more free agents. And we know that was a big conversation as spring training started. And then when he was asked how, if he felt Moreno would heed his suggestion, Mike Trout said, it's how Artie is, right? So that verbatim right there. Yeah.
That's very good by Trout. Yeah. Now, the reason why all this is being discussed is because the CBA contract negotiations, they're expected to be a bit contentious after next season. So in particular, it's expected that the competitive balance in spending will be a major point. And a part of that is because of how the Dodgers have spent and what they've done with contracts in deferring a lot of contracts. Now, that's not a new idea, but doing it as often as the Dodgers have, deferring contracts, has caught the attention of a lot of different people. And one of the things you've said on this show, John, is that's going to be a problem. Not because you're upset with the Dodgers and they're spending.
No, Mike, you're just a loser Angel fan.
Right.
Yeah,
that's been the response that we've received, right? But the reality is that that's gonna be a reality. And one of the points that we brought up on this show is because some of the teams that benefit from the luxury tax spending, like if you go over it, that money goes to the smaller market teams. If the Dodgers are deferring, they're actually keeping themselves under certain spending limits, so they're not having to pay a certain tax, which does go to those other teams, meaning that they have found a loophole that is right now allowed in the CBA that the smaller market teams, we don't think are going to be cool with, right? Because they're not going to get their money. The A's are not going to get their money. The Royals are not going to get their money, right? And so that's where the fight might actually be. It's not going to be just a conversation between players and owners. It might actually be owners and owners because there's some money that's not going into the pockets of some of these teams that are smaller market teams.
Exactly. So I wouldn't even say it's a loophole. It's part of the CBA. Like everybody can do this, but it's the amount of spending that can't be matched. And so that's where the concern comes up. But you're right. When the Dodgers go over the luxury tax, but then deferrals keep that number from going, again, you mentioned it, 20% for every dollar over the luxury tax. Well, if their deferrals keep their luxury tax salary lower than it should actually be, then other teams are going to be upset, especially owners. You can't tell me that some owner out there is not going to be mad about the $1 million they're not getting from the luxury tax threshold, right?
Just for example, so Shohei's contract is quote unquote $70 million a year, right?
Right.
But the luxury tax hit is around $40 million a year.
46 million,
based on deferrals and how they've arranged it. Now that's it's right now 24, almost $30 million that they're not going to be over the luxury tax, and 20% on every dollar, like
60 million.
That compounds, right? And so that money is not going to these other teams, which is why there's a feeling that this is going to be pretty contentious when they get into negotiating.
Yeah. So when Rob Manfred, commissioner of baseball, spoke on this, he said, it's clear we have some fans in markets that are concerned about the ability of their team in their market to compete with the financial resources of the Dodgers. And the Angels are, like I said, in the same market as the Dodgers, but they operate differently. Tony Clark says, it's clear the Angels' desire to remain below the luxury tax establishes a set strategy that goes against the union's stated purpose. In a world where teams are committed to putting the best teams on the field, using a part of the system as an excuse not to continue to push forward, yes, we have concerns there. We're concerned about every team that isn't focused on putting the best team possible on the field, and using something as a cap that isn't a cap. That's not why it was designed. So those are the comments from Tony Clark. That's a little bit of an update on the situation, and we'll give our responses here in just a minute.
Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. They're America's #1 sportsbook, and they're allowing you to get in on all of the NBA action. You can place bets at the start of the game or throughout the game, even if you miss the opening tip-off, or if you join the game and it's the fourth quarter and you're seeing a comeback, you can actually place a bet and you can stay in on all the action. Who's going to win? Who's going to score the most points? Who's going to get the last bucket? All of that is available on FanDuel.com. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. So easy to do, all on the app, easy to use. When you win, you get paid instantly. So right now, if you're a new customer to FanDuel, you get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Again, visit their website, FanDuel.com, or download their app, and you can make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.
All right, Mike. So we saved our responses to this whole conversation and to Tony Clark for the end, but let me just sum up kind of what we just went through here. The Angels are using the luxury tax as a salary cap, quote unquote, right? So that first threshold, they don't want to go above that. Tony Clark says the Angels should be one of baseball's biggest spenders. He says that it's concerning because the Halos are not putting the best team on the field because of how they use the luxury tax threshold. And then the Halos responded with a very simple statement that said, that's his opinion, and we don't agree with it. So now that we've reiterated all of that, where do you stand on this conversation about spending and the luxury tax threshold? And especially from a union, the head of the union, like Tony Clark, I think that it's more pointed than fans getting upset than about Artie not going over the luxury tax. This is coming from somebody, with some pull and some sway, right?
Right. And it's not surprising. And it's something that Angel fans have been talking about for a long time. And this is why being an everydayer and paying close attention to this team gives you a bit more knowledge as to what's happening. And here's what's happening in case you didn't know. Yes, the Angels are using the luxury tax as a cap. They are. Mm-hmm. Whether they admit it or not, that's fine. They don't have to admit it. They could disagree with Tony Clark, whatever. They are using it as a cap. They're not going to spend over that amount. And the evidence of that has been what they've spent the last few years, but also when they tried to get under that cap after making those trades and then putting those 6 players on the waivers.
Well, and even Artie Moreno's comments from spring training about we don't have $200 million to spend on one player. We got to spread that around. We got to do this. We got to do that. And so that precluded them from going over the luxury tax for somebody like a Corbin Burns or a Big Bat or something like that. So it's obviously, and you don't have to read between the lines because it's very, very obvious how they treat the luxury tax threshold.
Now, Tony Clark also said that the Angels should be one of baseball's biggest spenders. Now, they've been in the top 10 the last few years. They have been spending money. But that's, again, why being an everydayer is important, because when you look at this team, you recognize, yes, they have spent on players. Here's the problem. They just haven't had other players to surround those big money players with. And that doesn't mean that they should go and get another big money player. It means that they need to develop these players, and that's been the biggest issue. They just haven't had the investment in developing players. Not until recently have we been really excited about the young players. Yeah. Neto, Ohapi, Shawnuel, those guys are exciting, right? And the reason why they're exciting is because they came up through our system. We see a young excitement from them. We see a desire to win from them. And so it isn't just about what the Dodgers are doing, and the Dodgers went and got the best people at each position and gave them all the money, right? This is about the Angels not providing Shohei and providing Mike and providing Albert, all of the players that could potentially help them to win. Instead, it was Mike Trout and then a long drop to the next player. Yeah. Or it was Trout, Ohtani, and Pujols and then a long drop. The other part, though, was injuries. And the problem with that is that becomes a narrative that Artie and his team can spin. He said, I can't go out there and play for these guys. If they're not healthy, I can't control that. All of that's true. The problem is there's a lack of self-awareness for the damage that has been done with the lack of spending in the minor leagues and getting rid of people who know how to draft well, and you didn't have them around and you didn't draft well, right? And so that's where a lot of this comes down to. It's not just about spending all the money that you can. It's about spending the money in a wise and helpful and strategic way, which is why I've appreciated personally how Perry Manassian has approached putting this year's team together. Now, if this year's team struggles and doesn't improve over last year's team, then I think that his seat is going to get really hot because he hasn't been able to put a really good team out there. I have hope, and based off of what I see, that this team could be potentially a 500 team. If they're better than that, my gosh, how incredible would that be? But I think the ceiling for this team is 500 because they've put some money in the minor leagues and they put some money in drafting. They've made some really good minor league trades, getting some prospects. So Tony Clark's not wrong, but the problem isn't that the Angels are just not spending. The problem is that the Angels haven't invested. And I think that that's the difference between what Tony is saying and what Angel fans are seeing.
I like that. It's not so much spending, it's investment. And look, the fact is the Angels do spend. Do they spend wisely? No, not all the time. Right. We had that conversation 2 years ago where Artie said, hey, Perry, what about Trey Turner? And Perry said, okay, yeah, fine. But if you don't want to go over the luxury tax, we got to spread that Trey Turner money around because we have a lot of needs on the field. And then you kind of hear that echoed in what Artie had to say before spring training. And it was, we couldn't go out and spend this money on one player. We had to spread it around. We didn't have enough depth. And so I guess some of that is sinking in for Artie Moreno. But it's interesting to me, Mike, because yes, the Angels have the ability to go over the luxury tax. Yes, they have the ability to make major signings that will 100% improve this team. They have that ability, but they've also been burned by the ability to do that with like a Pujols contract, a Hamilton contract, a Trout contract even, right? Because Trout's been injured. Rendon, obviously. So to me, the problem that I think the disconnect here is that the Angels and Artie Moreno just don't see that, hey, when Trout got hurt, you should have had enough invested in the minor leagues so that, I don't know, use him like Nelson Rada, say a Nelson Rada type guy could come up and replace Trout, right? And obviously not Rada's not ready yet, but I'm saying somebody should have been in the minor leagues that you're excited about that could replace Trout in those seasons. You didn't have any of that. And that's why teams like the Rays don't have to spend a ton of money because they've invested in the minor leagues. Because you know what's cheaper to invest in? Your minor league system than the next $500 million player, Juan Soto type, that sort of guy. It's a lot cheaper to invest in your minor leagues and develop. And then you see the reward and the benefit of that with teams like the Rays. Heck, with teams like the A's. I know that they have a terrible ownership situation, but the fact is they have developed and they develop well. And that's something that they've continued to do. Now they don't hang on to their star players, which is a problem. And so if that were the situation with the Angels, I think we would be having a very different conversation. But the fact is the Angels are finally making the investment in the minor leagues. And I know they've rushed up players, but the truth is this is how they're choosing to spend. And, being the top 10 in payroll, like it's not as if they don't spend. Again, it comes down to they don't spend wisely. Once Rendon is off the books, maybe they learn from their mistakes and maybe they'll take that money, that $38 million he's owed, and turn around and give some of these guys long-term contracts like Neto and Ohapi, because that's where you want the money to go. That's what you want to invest in. And so even though they're not hitting that luxury tax threshold, I feel like it's a strange conversation to have because it feels very pointed toward the Angels. But at the same time, I understand they're in a big market, not spending like a big market team. But this doesn't feel like new information. It's more than just Angel fans know that the luxury tax is a threshold, is a salary cap, but that's a conversation around baseball. So it doesn't feel like new information to me. At the end of the day, it's where the Angels have invested their money too much into one singular player versus spreading the wealth. And you're right. I think what they did in 2023 to spread the wealth on the field, to get your Hunter Renfroes and Gio Urshela's and things like that, sign Tyler Anderson, I think they did that again this offseason. I think they've spread the wealth around just to make sure they have depth, just to make sure they have guys who can back up the guys on the field. So to say that the threshold prevents them from putting their best foot forward on the field, well, I can think of about 15 other teams who don't even come close to the luxury tax, and they don't put their best foot forward to put the best product on the field either. So it just feels a little bit pointed to me. Not trying to defend Artie. I'm just trying to clarify this conversation.
Hey, thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen of the day. Now, for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB with our friend Sully. You can find his show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, what do we got on deck for Wednesday's show, Mike, when we come back?
Well, Sal Fasano is back with the Angels, and he spoke about how the Halo's starting pitching staff and overall pitching staff have a new approach this season, and he shared, and it was interesting, and so we're going to share what he shared, and then we're going to share our thoughts tomorrow on Locked On Angels.
All right, looking forward to that conversation. In the meantime, keep up with us on Twitter, at Locked On Angels, and at Super Halo Bros on Twitter and Instagram. Until tomorrow's show, my name is John, and that's my brother Mike.
And my name is Mike, and that's my brother John.
Thanks for being here with us, everybody, and we'll see you back here on Wednesday.
Someone asked for sound effects when these videos come up, so I'm just trying to help.
That's how I put my son to sleep.